Hey guys, this is Echo Soundworks and you are checking out a Sylenth tutorial on ADSRsounds.com. So in this video, we're going to be looking at how you can recreate that really big, gritty bass you heard, this top red track, inside of Sylenth. Now I soloed the second red track, which is a bass that I layered with it, which is also coming from Sylenth, and it's kind of more of a typical deep house style bass. It's just a low-tuned sine wave with a saw wave kind of mixed in with some detune. Some reverb and some light distortion. Nothing too interesting going on with that sound. But I layered those together, and the one that I wanted to focus on was this one because I think it's more interesting for Sylenth. And the reason why I wanted to look at this bass is because if I take off this distortion, right, it's a very different bass. So I wanted to kind of talk about what the distortion's role in Sylenth can be, especially for bass sounds, because in a synth like Sylenth where you only get a host of a few different types of filters, we don't get a ton of different filtering types. We get low pass, we get bandpass and high pass, right? And then for the actual waveforms, we don't get a whole lot either. We get sine, you get saw, triangle, pulse, H pulse, Q pulse, which are basically pulse width modulated versions of the pulse wave. And then you get this triangle, saw, and finally noise. So it's not like certain synths that give you a bunch of different wavetables or sounds to play around with. So you have to find your interesting element in the sound design process outside of your oscillators. And even with a synth like Sylenth with some fairly simple filters, just very common filters, you got to kind of go elsewhere. And one of my favorite places to dabble around with bass sounds is the distortion, because I really like the distortion. There's some really cool distortion types in Sylenth. So let's jump into recreating this actual sound inside of Sylenth. So I'm going to duplicate this track. And while I do that, I get asked this all the time on my tutorials. This DAW that you're looking at is Logic X with a Pro Tools theme. If you want to find it, just Google it. There's tons of free ones. This was a paid one, but there are lots of them out there. All right, so I'm going to initialize this sound by going to Menu, Init Preset, and this is a skin for Sylenth too. It's made by the same guy who made the skin or the GUI, rather, for Serum. It looks great. So here we go. All right, so I do have some sidechain, some parallel sidechain LFO tooling going on, which is basically some sidechain compression. So I'm going to turn that off while we recreate the sound. All right, so this sound is going to use basically just one oscillator for the actual tone. And then part B, we're going to be layering in some noise. So I'm going to start with the noise first, just because I know I'm going to be using it. And I kind of want to balance that out before I get the actual oscillators with the waveforms dialed in. So what we're going to do here is we're going to just turn this volume down. We're going to give it two voices. So now we have... All right, and let's go now to oscillator or part A and make sure you're on oscillator A. All right, so in oscillator A, we're going to change this to the triangle waveform. Looks a little bit like the saw, well, kind of, not really, but it's this, if you start from the sine, it's the 1, 2, third one in. And the reason I'm using that is because I don't use that a lot. Like I said, I was trying to make a bass that had a lot of character. I wanted to stay away from the whole saw sound. So we're going to do the same thing in oscillator A2. We're going to select the triangle wave. And now we need to give oscillator A2 some voices. We're going to turn the voice count up to 4 for oscillator A2. And we're going to turn the voice count up all the way to 8 for oscillator A1. And now, like I said, the noise is a very prominent part of this specific sound. So I'm going to turn mix B down, so I don't hear as much of that during the rest of the sound design process. All right, so let's finish up A1. This is going to be kind of a subby low bass, so I want this to be detuned all the way with the octave to -1. And I want the same thing to happen in oscillator A2. So if I solo just our part A. All right, so for the volume for oscillator A1, because this is what our main sound's coming from, we're going to keep it checked on retrigger. So the phases are going to retrigger. Every time I push a note or MIDI information comes into the DAW, it's going to re-trigger the phase of this waveform. So we're going to keep this volume all the way up to 10. Now the phase I'm going to play around with until I get to a point that I like. kind of like it around 96. We're going to add a little bit of detune just to make this a pinch wider, but not a lot. Maybe just a shade under 2. All right, the stereo I'm going to leave up. The pan I'm not going to touch. So in oscillator A2, we're going to keep this retriggered. We only have it on 4 voices. We're going to turn the phase up a good amount, so it's triggering a different phase. So this phase was at about 96, so we'll do about 135 or so, maybe even a little bit higher. I'll go up to about 140, 145. So these are triggering kind of in different parts of the waveform. That helps to make them less digital sounding, at least to my ear. And then for the volume, let's turn the volume down to about halfway. All right, so we got a nice clean tone, and if I unsolo part A and bring the noise back, it's still kind of crazy, so I'll keep soloing that for now. Let's go to the amp envelope, because this doesn't have the punchiness of a, it has too long of a, it's almost more of like a hip-hop bass right now. If I cranked up the legato, it would be more of like a hip-hop sound. So what we're going to do now is, let's turn the polyphony to 1. And then we're going to turn up the portamento. So now I can't play chords. You can see down my keyboard. Won't happen. But now there'll be a little bit of glide. I can control the glide that way. Sometimes I like doing this as opposed to using the mono legato mode because I like how the portamento reacts with just the polyphony of 1. But you can use mono mode if you like. All right, so the amp envelope. I'm going to turn the attack up a little bit because that kind of gives it that sound that Future House is kind of becoming synonymous with. So we're going to go up to about 2 for the attack. And there's actually a mixed reason why that is. The Future House basses typically will have low frequency content, right? Well, if you look at where the notes are happening, it's happening on a lot of the downs with the kick. So it's kind of nice to have the note kind of swing and glide in with the attack into the full peak volume of your ADSR of the sound because it leaves a little bit more room for the bass before you even do your EQ cuts and all the things that you do mix-wise to kind of get those to fit together. So with the decay now, I'm going to turn this decay up to about 5. All right, the sustain we can leave pretty much where it is, and then we need to give it a little bit more release, so I'm going to go until I hear a part that I like, or a point that I like. All right, so 1.82 sounds cool. All right, let's jump over now to part B and do the amp envelope for part B. We're going to just turn down the sustain a little. So it's going to kind of control the volume. And we're going to boost the amp as well. So the attack, sorry. Turn the attack up to the same amount that we turned it up to with our first 2 oscillators in part A. Actually, a shade under might sound cooler. All right, so I have the attack set to 1.31 in my amp envelope B, which is just our noise. We're not using oscillator B2 for anything. All right, so now that we got that all taken care of, let's go down to our filter. So in filter A, we are going to select a bandpass filter of all things. We're going to turn the slope up to 12 dB. All right, so that killed most of the sound, right? But we're going to bring it back in. So let's finish setting the cutoff and all that in the filter. So for filter A, we're going to go down to about 19 hertz. All right, the resonance, I'm going to turn the resonance up to just a shade under halfway. I like what the resonance does with the bandpass filter. All right, and the drive, we are going to drive this to bring back some of that volume that we lost. All right, so I'm kind of digging that. Now with part B, with the filter, we're going to apply a different filter type. So make sure your input select is just on B. We're going to select low pass filter. We're not going to touch the resonance because it's just noise. We're not going to touch the drive. I'm going to turn the cutoff down to a little bit under halfway, and then turn the slope up to 12 dB to match our first one. So that takes out a lot of like the white noise element. Makes it a little bit darker sounding noise. So now if we play both part A and B together with the filters set up. All right, let's go to the master filter control, because I'm going to, if you guys watch my tutorials, I usually kill a lot of the frequencies coming into the master filter, and then I bring them back in using a modulation envelope. And that's just because that's how I look at subtractive synthesis. I'm trying to subtract from the tone and then add things back in later, which we'll be doing with the envelope and the distortion. So let's turn the cutoff down. We're going to turn this master cutoff down a good amount. So around 32, 33 hertz should work. We'll go 32, if I can get it to a straight 32. All right, and then for the resonance in this, we're going to turn it up to about 1.5. Give it a little bit of key tracking. All right, so now we just got this crazy big, like, subby bass. All right, and if you're wondering how did it turn into that other one, you'll see in a minute. It's kind of cool. All right, so we're going to go down to our modulation envelope, and we are going to select cutoff A and B, because we are using both parts A and B. I'm going to turn this little rotary knob here to about 2.76, maybe just a shade under 3. All right, and we're going to turn now the decay up to about 4.5 or 5. All right, so I like it right there, about 4.5, 4.5. All right, and this is what this is doing. For those of you who don't know, maybe you're brand new to Sylenth, we're controlling the cutoff filter. Now, instead of just having the knob turned up in the resonance or the drive, we're now controlling what we kind of set up with cutoff A and B. So we're controlling the cutoff and the resonance of drive of our bandpass filter with this envelope shape. So it's kind of like you're sculpting the sound of the filter in a very tangible way, as opposed to just letting the filters run freely. So this makes a sound, it's starting to already sound a lot more like a future house style bass. So I'm going to give this a little bit of attack as well. Just a little. All right, and then the decay and the release I am not going to touch for this cutoff A and B in our first modulation envelope. Now we're going to go to the second modulation envelope, and I'm going to select pitch A and B. And the reason I'm doing this is it's kind of this trick to get this really kind of a click to the attack. It's kind of like a kick tick, but with a bass sound. You can do it with any sound, actually. So we're going to turn the decay up to just a little bit, maybe about 0.75, 0.80, around there. And then we're going to turn the pitch, the little rotary knob, up just a little. So if you turn it up too much, you get this nasty laser sound. But we just want to add a little bit of character to the initial attack of the sound. So now I'm at about 1.32 and 1.90 for the actual knob. All right, so we're not going to do a whole lot with we're not going to do anything actually with the LFOs for the sound. I do want to set up the mod wheel real quick, just in case I want that. So I'm going to go mod wheel and then cut off A and B, and then we're going to turn the source up just a little bit. So now our mod wheel will turn our modulation envelope and cutoff filters up all at the same time. All right, so that's the sound pre-effects. So let's go to our distortion now, and this is where it's really going to start to take shape. So I'm going to click on distortion, and for the type, I'm going to use Foldback, which is a really interesting digital sounding distortion. Now, the amount I had pretty high. I had it above halfway at about 6.5. And then the dry wet, I'm going to turn down a little. All right, so let's turn down the actual main sound now, and we're going to add a couple more effects. So I like using the phaser inside of Sylenth to add some character to the sound. So your center frequency, keep halfway. Your spread, keep halfway. Left, right, offset, keep in the middle. Width, we're going to keep up all the way. The LFO rate and gain, we're going to turn down because we don't want the low frequency effect in this specific use of how we're using the phaser. Turn the feedback down to about 2 or 3%, and then turn your dry wet down a good amount. I usually will have it around 15 to 17%. right, and now let's go to the EQ and kind of carve out some frequencies here. So I'm going to have it on 2-pole. So you need to select 2-pole. This skin does have an issue with this little box right here, but it says 2-pole right there. All right, so for the bass frequency, I'm not going to touch. The bass frequency, I want to play around with. So I have it about 390, 383 hertz. All right, so for the treble, I'm going to play around that now. And like I said, this is the character part of the sound. So I'm going to boost a lot of the treble frequencies, maybe to about 14. And now we play with the treble frequency. All right, so I get around 1,232 hertz. So before the effects, we have this, and then with the 3 effects we have so far. All right, so that's starting to take shape. I think I did have a little bit of reverb on this sound as well, which of course you could always do third party if you'd like, so we'll just set that up real quick. I think I just use it for basically width. All right, so if we bring back in this sidechain compression that I set up with the LFO tool, and then the other bass, this is what we got. All right, and now I want to touch on how I set up this sidechain compression. I like using the LFO tool. It's basically a very simple and effective way to create a sidechain compression style effect without actually having to do sidechain compression. Some people hate this, some people love it. I'm on the latter of those. I love the LFO tool. But what I did was I just set up an aux send through on the LFO tool. So on my main channel, we just have the dry sound coming from Sylenth, and here is the soloed version of my aux send. And then I get to just blend those together and kind of, have the best of both worlds, and I don't have to duplicate tracks and do all that stuff. So final sound is this. All right, if you guys have any questions or comments, let me know below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.